a moment-to-moment experience of that, or is that something that you...
I did. It was an anonymous role, but a very important role. I was called back before I ever knew there was a Cuban Missile Crisis. Before we even heard that term, I was called to come back to Washington to help out by the Deputy Director of CIA, and he asked me to head a small team. There must have been 6 of us, I think, whose job was to study the intelligence that was coming in every day, particularly the photographs from the overflights, but the communications intelligence as well, and to write a report by the end of the day which would assess whether or not the medium-range missiles which were being deployed in Cuba were operational yet, or how long it would be before they became operational. This report got to President Kennedy first thing in the morning and helped him decide how much more time he had for diplomacy. So it was a very important role in that, in the face of advisors of his who were urging an attack on Cuba, a military attack, he was trying to hold that off as long as possible to give diplomacy a chance to work. But he wanted to know how long he had to do that, and so the purpose of this study we were doing each day was to basically advise him how many more days he had for diplomacy.
I didn't appreciate until very recently. I just recorded a podcast with Fred Kaplan, who wrote a book focusing on the experience of each administration that has engaged with our nuclear policy. And I wasn't aware of the degree to which Kennedy was essentially being goaded to war, and the mistaken impression we got that he sort of stared Khrushchev down and Khrushchev blinked. There was a sort of back-channel deal around pulling our nukes out of Turkey, which is what de-escalated the crisis. And I think that wasn't revealed until 20 years later. What lesson do you draw from that moment in history, and how has your thinking about nuclear weapons evolved since?
Well, I was close enough to what was happening that I believed, every day that I went into the analysis center, I believed it was going to be my last day on Earth. I knew the president was being pressured to take military action. I could see how dangerous the military action would be and how likely it would be to escalate. What I did not know at the time, and therefore the president did not know, was that in addition to the medium-range missiles, which were not yet operational, the Soviets had also deployed so-called tactical nuclear missiles. They were already there. They were already loaded with nuclear warheads, and the military commander of that unit had the authority to use them. So if Kennedy had accepted the advice of his military advisors to attack Cuba, in particular if he'd made an invasion of Cuba, our troops undoubtedly would have been decimated on the beachhead with tactical nuclear weapons, and a general nuclear war would surely have called it. Now, we didn't know that at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so when Kennedy assessed that the likelihood of a Cuban Missile Crisis erupting into a catastrophic nuclear war was 1 chance in 3, he made that assessment without the knowledge that those tactical nuclear weapons were already there and already operational. So the situation was much more dangerous than he realized. I would assess the likelihood of that ending in a catastrophic war, knowing what I now know, it's better than 50-50.
And take me back to the beginning of our thinking about these weapons and their use. I mean, I guess the real beginning is our first use of them at Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Right.
At the time, how did you view our use of, I guess Nagasaki is harder or perhaps easier to dismiss as a misuse of nuclear weapons, but what did you think, and what do you think about our use at Hiroshima?
Well, at the time, it's easy. I can easily tell you what I thought then. I was a 17-year-old. I was about ready to go into the Army.
You would have been sent to Japan?
I was actually sent to Japan,
okay.
But that was after the war was over. So a few months after the bomb was dropped, I went into the Army and after basic training went on to the Army of Occupation in Japan. So I was wholly in favor of it at the time. It was only later that I began to see the ramifications well beyond the quick ending of the war.
Right. We should remind people of the history here, because the war against Germany had already been won, right? I mean, Hitler was already dead at that point. And this was really a story of ending the war with Japan earlier than it would have ended otherwise. Really, I don't think